All right, guys, let's talk more about coronavirus. So, a part of me is getting worn out talking and thinking about this thing. And I should probably not be looking too much into it, but at the same time, it definitely bothers me. And it bothers me because there's so many things we don't know about it. And also, though, assuming everything stays calm here in America and in other parts of the world, like, there was a death in the Philippines and there was a death in Hong Kong, which are interesting. A lot of people are pointing out the death rate is low outside of China, but also the infected rate is low outside of China. So those are, in my opinion, those are important keys, very important. But one reason I am fascinated with this is even if it's contained within China, what's going on in China is totally unknown. So since I was in Taiwan, I was paying very close attention to this right from the beginning. As I've said before, I first caught wind of this around the middle part of January, before the Lunar New Year, which was when shit really started getting kicked off a little bit before that time. Right before the Lunar New Year was whenever the sirens were basically let loose. But I remember about a week and a half or so before that was when I started following this mysterious disease, infection, whatever, that was getting people. Now, what's fascinating to me and some other observers to this is regardless of what the official statistics are, the sheer size and mobilization of what's going on within China is it seems unprecedented in modern day. When I mean modern day, I mean the last 30 years. And keep in mind, I'm not a scholar of China. I know some history, but I lived there briefly about 7 years ago. But like being there, I don't recall them having such a huge response to something like this. So for anybody that doesn't know, once again, they quarantined basically an entire province that has more people than like the entire state of Texas. They have one city alone, Wuhan, has 11 million people, and they quarantined it. People are not allowed to leave unless it's to go get food. I've read in multiple I've read from articles from Chinese newspapers that they're only allowing certain people to leave, certain designated people to leave, to go get food, to go get groceries like twice a week. I talk to people from mainland regularly, and I know for a fact that people in Beijing and Shanghai are not leaving their houses all over China. All over China. I talked to somebody from Nanjing today who was also not leaving their home. And kids are not going back to school, and here's the thing, they don't know, nobody knows when they're going to be allowed to go back to school. That's another key. They don't know when they're going to be allowed to go back to school. This is super, super interesting, given how, China operates, because this is it. Okay, so this is huge. I've said so before that the Chinese Communist Party, a lot of their legitimacy is based on economic growth. And they are effectively halting the economy in order to take care of this virus. Now, what's so strange is that there are people that are clearly not at least sick that are being taken away. There's videos coming out of people fighting to not be thrown into quarantine. The new quote-unquote hospitals that people are being thrown into look more like prisons than hospitals. And there are reports that that they're burning bodies, like, dead bodies, that they're getting that the crematoriums are getting, the morgues are getting like bodies all day long that they're burning in the city. But at the same time, there is no, it's all just, things are just leaking out in pieces. So you see a picture of people laying in the street. You see a video of soldiers in hazmat suits welding people into their homes that are suspected, that are pulling people out of their homes. You see footage of people being welded into their homes so they can't leave that are suspected virus patients. There is so much weird shit going on. I just want to know what the fuck is going on. I think everybody wants to know what the fuck is going on. But nobody knows what the fuck is going on. That is so key here. Nobody knows what's happening. And it's whatever is happening is huge. I wonder if we're going to look back on this time and be able to figure out and parse through the details of what's happening. Some people are saying that people are going down, like there's probably hundreds dying every day, whereas the official death count is 490 something. Since they're burning all the bodies, since the Communist Party has ordered that the bodies be burned because people could be infected, because of that alone, there is likely never going to be proof of how many people died unless you go and talk to people that had family members that died. And that's going to be hard, right? I mean, I don't think that's going to be an easy, I don't think you're going to easily get that information. So the world everyone should have their eyes on China right now, in my opinion. Everyone should be watching what is going on over there and trying to figure out what is happening, because it's hard to know what is being covered up. Is it the fact that the virus is so big? Is it the fact that the Chinese Communist Party is purging people and getting rid of dissidents? Because some people think that they are, basically there were protests and they're taking down protesters and this is all a cover. And then some people are like, hey, it makes sense what they're doing is they're building these hospitals. They're going to throw people in them. If the people die, they can burn them on site. And if they look like they're going to live, they'll throw them in a recovery center. What else is strange to me, which is another reason why I think this virus situation is real and very serious, is that they keep opening up more and more locations and seizing more and more places to use for sick people. So there are headlines. I've seen 2 or 3 different headlines where in Wuhan, they have seized gymnasiums, and reporters on the ground are saying on Twitter, they're saying that they've been kicked out of their hotels so that they can be used for sick patients. And it's like, okay, if this is really what's going on, then the scale of this thing is gigantic. But at the same time, there's kind of a mix of it looks like chaos is going on in certain parts of the country. Now, that being said, I think Westerners, non-Chinese people, especially Americans, will have and maybe Europeans will have a very hard time understanding how the Chinese are coping with this. A lot of people, I read something today that people said, look, honestly, people here seem okay. Like, yes, there are things going on. People are, a little nervous at times. Things aren't great. But overall, people are getting along fairly well. Like, people are getting along okay for what they have to do. They're watching TV. They're on the internet. They're getting food. As long as they're getting these things, they're kind of okay. And somebody mentioned that they are dealing with this better than they thought. And I'm thinking, yeah, that makes sense. But in order to understand how Chinese people might be okay with this kind of quarantine and nationwide lockdown, in my opinion, you have to understand where so many of them came from. I've had to explain this to many people that, I don't know that much about Chinese history except for some contemporary history with the the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution and things like that, where the country, and of course at the beginning of the century, the country was not doing so well because of, Britain and France. Now, aside from that, though, from what I think is the disaster of the Cultural Revolution and the Great Leap Forward, where, hundreds of millions of people were estimated to have died, Mao tried to effectively destroy many aspects of traditional Chinese culture. I think that, and that wasn't that long ago, that was in the 60s and the 70s. Okay, so we're talking about people's parents and grandparents that are still alive today. A lot of people lived through those times. So a lot of these people see people wonder, how could the Chinese be okay with the government censorship? Well, when your government, when like hundreds of millions of your countrymen were dying in famine, and then you had groups of Red Guards roaming the country, killing people in the name of Mao's Little Red Book. And then you go, okay, we're going to stop the famine and the poverty, and now people can have jobs. Think about it. From that time in the 60s and 70s of mass societal breakdown and famine, going from that point to now where it's like, okay, I have to watch what I say on social media, but I can get the food I need. I can see my family on Chinese New Year. We can celebrate birthdays, which they couldn't do under certain times of Mao's reign. They're like, okay, there are certain things that they can do now that they couldn't do in the past. So they are, in some ways, Chinese are a hardier stock in that they are able to endure these types of hardships because it's in their very near past. And so it makes sense to me that some of them are dealing with these quarantines, these severe and strict government actions pretty well. On that note, let's pause for a sponsor. I'll be right back. So anyway, the Chinese have dealt with their quarantine, in my opinion, pretty well. Obviously, we don't know everything that's going on over there. And I'm sure, I have seen videos of riots and upheaval in certain areas. Some people are not wanting to go with police or, to be quarantined. That's understandable. Now, what else is going on over in China land? Now, that being said, the situation in China seems completely unknowable. It seems like a black box in many, many respects. And I would also like to point out that because of that, I think because of the data points that we do know, we should be preparing in the US. Now, that doesn't mean everybody needs to go freak out and fucking go panic and go into mass hysteria, but I do think everyone should be loading up on things like water, food, some medical supplies, things that you need, because this thing may be well under control here in the US. And I hope that is the case. But whatever's going on in China is concerning. Now, of course, they've got like 4 times our population. Their population density is fucking insane. In my opinion, that's also one reason why I left Taipei. So the thing about Taipei is, the population isn't nearly as packed in as, parts of mainland China. But in Taiwan and Taipei, you are packed in a lot more than you are in Houston. In Houston, everything is extremely spread out. I've said before, I was talking to friends that at least in America, one of our downsides is public transportation. Things are spread out. You got to use a car. But in terms of this kind of epidemic situation or pandemic situation, it's actually not so bad. Because everyone's spread out, you're in your car, you can avoid some contact with people, you can minimize points of contact with people easier. In fact, a lot of us don't have a lot of contact with people, and it's not even our choice. So that is a possible benefit to what's going on with America. Now, I think that also we are totally unprepared socially for something like this. And that's one thing that I wish we could fix is it's like, okay, if because of the nature of our situation, very much freedom loving people, I think that people should be prepared to self isolate. People, businesses, myself included. Now, it's easy for me to say, right? Because I work online. So I'm like, yeah, I could self isolate, no problem. It's not easy for people to say that have to go into a place with other people. That's not easy. That's not easy to be a business owner or to be, an employee or a contractor that has to go into work physically. It's not easy to make that call. But I think that we need to be ready to make that call. And once again, this is why we need to have savings. So I've thought a lot about these next few months. So unfortunately, I just injured myself training for a Taekwondo tournament again. Fucking Christ. I messed up my ankle yesterday training. Just light training. But I really hurt that ankle while I was hardcore training. I fucked it up big time last year. So as I've done research, since I've done my internet research, I've learned that it's very common that once someone has a very bad or severe sprain on an ankle, it can be quite common to have a chronic problem with that ankle because the ligaments don't return back to the strength that they previously had before the injury. So you are open and vulnerable to more and more. Now, before I had this injury, I had planned okay, I'm going to do some kickboxing and Taekwondo tournaments while I'm here in America until I can get back to Taiwan. And I kind of came at these tournaments with a new fire, a new passion, because last year, I had a couple injuries, but it had also been coming off of a couple years of pretty intense competition. About 2 straight years of almost nonstop back-to-back training. And so last year, I was like, okay, honestly, I'm kind of just want to take a break. So I came back to it with a passion and a fire. And I'm like, hey, I just had to buy an emergency ticket back from Taiwan to the States. And I was like, man, that shit sucks. It's expensive. And I had to do a couple of other things. I had to spend a little bit of money. And I remember thinking to myself, thank God that I saved some fucking money. Now, I don't have a whole lot of money, but I keep my expenses low and I make sure I have some emergency funds and I've got some credit cards, right? So it's one of those things where I could basically pay if I need a little bit more. If I have to pay a little bit more out of pocket, you can put it on the credit card and spread out the payments and not, kick yourself in the gut so hard. Now I know some people would disagree that you should do that because the interest is high, but regardless, I learned in this situation how my savings and my low expense lifestyle have really, really helped me. One is, of course, the work I do is online, so I'm able to go to Taiwan. However, I would not have gone to Taiwan with zero cash in the bank. And you want to know why? Because exactly the reason why I just came back from Taiwan. Because in an emergency situation where you got to where you got to buy a fucking airplane ticket for $800, you want to make sure you've got the money to do it. You don't want to put yourself in a position where you have no options, where you have no way out. And so that's why I'm very, very happy that I did that. I've also had to meditate on the idea of living in the moment and investing for the future and making sure you have emergency funds. So part of the experiment that I'm currently engaging in with my life is about gaining valuable experiences. I believe that one of the most valuable things I can do now, above and beyond just reading and learning from watching, is doing. And so, hence going to Taiwan to learn more Mandarin, learn more about the culture, really just immerse myself. That's an experience. That's not just reading about Taiwan or learning Mandarin from a textbook. Now, then there's also Taekwondo and kickboxing and stuff. I've done Taekwondo for many years. I haven't done kickboxing, but it's something I've always wanted to do. It's an experience, it's an investment, right? I'm not going to be a professional kickboxer, but it would be a valuable experience to get in the ring and do a couple bouts, to do a couple rounds, and get some experience, be able to provide some knowledge and perspective. And what's interesting about that is, well, that's a tangent, but I'll indulge myself for a second. What's interesting is that some of the experiences I've had, like living in China, researching China and Asia, just being an overall student of kind of current events, which it's really not that big a deal, but being a student of history, at least more contemporary history, being somebody who doesn't just travel but explores and learns, has allowed me to some extent to sift through some bullshitters, right? I mean, the other day I was on Twitter and somebody was trying to tout the fact that they study international relations for some bullshit. And I just was like, I don't give a shit if you studied international relations. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't care. I don't give a fuck if you have studied international relations and you've read, all the slide decks that your professors gave you back to front to back. I don't give a shit. That doesn't mean anything. Just because you've possibly memorized things that you're supposed to regurgitate on a test based on the bias of a professor doesn't mean you know shit about the world. I've said so before. Recently, I've had some contact with a guy that was 21, accounting student from the U.S., but he was in Taiwan. And the level of conversation was so superficial. It was so superficial, but it was something that I'm also very familiar with. I myself have engaged in this at times and probably still do and probably will continue in many aspects, but hopefully not as much. But it's something where when you're younger and you have the arrogance of being in school and that's all you have to worry about, and you are a headline reader, you're strictly a headline reader, you have no experiences, you don't have any wisdom, and so, that kind of shit can make people think they know more than they know, and really they don't know anything. So over the years, just doing some of the things I've done, whether it be working, starting my own side hustles, working in my dad's small business, being in the corporate world, traveling around, doing shit, starting this podcast, just doing things. So back on track. I find that doing things is extremely important. And I want to continue to invest in my future by doing things now to gain experiences and to gain wisdom, but also with the balance of, but I need to make sure I don't spend myself into oblivion. And I can definitely say that if you do not take care of your savings, you can't invest in yourself. At this point in my life, I feel like I have more freedom than I've had in the last 5 years, simply because I've got myself out of debt, I've freed up some more time, have lowered my expenses, and I have some savings. It just means that I have more wiggle room. It's allowed me to cut back on some hours. It's allowed me to relocate to different places around the world. It's allowed me to make emergency decisions without even really worrying about the consequences, right? Like when I said I needed to come back from Taiwan, I said, hey, I need to come back just in case some shit breaks down over there. It's more densely populated in Taipei than it is in Houston. So I think that I'd be better off further away from China, where, lots of Chinese people come to Taiwan. Who knows how many are already infected in Taiwan? I have to use the public transportation, so I'm coming back. I was able to do that because I followed my plan from a year and a half ago, which was cut my expenses, increase my savings. My income has been all over the place, but because of some of the steps that I followed, it gave me the freedom to act when I needed to act. And, this is kind of a random rant, but it's extremely valuable to me. And I think for anyone else out there who's looking to improve their position, if you cut your expenses, take care of your savings, invest in the things that you want to do, it seems like the right thing to do. So we'll see how it all plays out in the end. Maybe I'll die tomorrow. Now, you can follow me on my blog. Just wrote a new fire article about the Wuhan pneumonia, the coronavirus, baby. tstuch.com, tstuch.com. You can follow me, like and subscribe. YouTube, Taylor Space Stutch. Follow me on Twitter, tstuch1. Follow me on Instagram, Stutchberry Taylor. You can also email me, tayradio1@gmail.com. Thank you for listening, sweethearts. Everybody, welcome home. Welcome home, my sweet babies. In this episode, I review some more information about coronavirus. Why we should all be watching China. Regardless of the virus itself, what's happening in China is fucking fascinating. And in my opinion, it will go down in history. Also, then I finish off this episode with a quite long-winded rant about life. Not just, existential crises, but some strategies that I've taken that really helped, whether it be about expenses, savings, income, some things that it really helped me over the last year. And they came in handy when I had to buy an emergency plane ticket. So you're going to like this episode, just like all the rest. You can subscribe to my YouTube, Taylor Space Stutch. Follow me on my blog, tstuch.com, tstuch.com. You can email me, tayradio1@gmail.com. You can follow my Twitter, tstuch1, tstuch, the number 1 on Twitter. And thank you. Enjoy.